Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19. Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Let's get lit, folks! Yeah. In my humble opinion, this whole charade, this orchestra, this massive opera of political shenanigans, the clusterfuck, as I like to call it, it's about something specific, and that isn't Russia and that isn't Donald Trump. It's about the normalizing of the chaos, normalizing criminal behavior, normalizing greed, normalizing hate rhetoric as valid, normalizing the constant strife and conflict of juxtaposed ideological polemics that cannot be resolved, just normalizing all this noise, normalizing the dismissal of what is admittedly a manipulated and corrupt media. It's not as horrible as they make it sound because they don't care what it's really like. They're not exposing the media as corrupt. Think about it. Almost everyone who says that is saying it from some form of media platform, and they themselves are inextricably tied up in the web of corruption. Not denying, I'm not a media corruption denier. What I'm saying is that's not what the agenda's about. It's not about exposing it and fixing it. Where's the fix? It's just getting all of that noise, all of that chaos, all of that negative energy, all of that conflict, all of that tension on all the levels, political tension, racial tension, economic tension. They're normalizing this activity at the top, and the stress load that it carries in the base. Because let it not be misunderstood. His base is being traumatized by his actions. Don't turn this around. Don't try to misquote this. Don't try to angle it some other way than what I mean. His behavior is toxic. His policies are toxic. His agenda is toxic. It's not even his agenda, folks. But that agenda, those policies, all of that are toxic. And those who support it may not be noticing it the way a lifelong smoker never really notices it until it's way too late. And I don't say that with hate or cynicism. I say that with the pain that it is to have wasted part of my life addicted to that product because I was exercising my free will to engage in, this toxic, unsustainable leisure activity. Everything they offer us to do, professional or otherwise, everything they offer us to argue about, political or otherwise, is designed. It's not all fake. It isn't staged. They're not paying everybody extra salaries to pretend to be offended. People are really offended. Politicians are really trying to get away with what they're trying to get away with. All the levels of the irony are true. That's the confusing part. Russia's really trying to mess with our election for whatever the fuck reasons Russia's doing it. But it's all one big, massive, interconnected web of bullshit, and always has been. Not just in our lifetimes, but centuries back. And we get to a place where I feel redundant, as I always do. But let's pause and remember. Let's take a moment and reflect that, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, George Orwell's tactics are literally coming out of this president's mouth. And that meme should, if it's not known to you, should become known to you, should be your banner for a week or three. That meme is perfect because we don't really know. I don't know that he ever really said this, that George Orwell ever said this, but his book was a warning, not an instruction manual. It really feels, it really looks, with both hindsight and the sort of insight many people had at the time, that Orwell 1984 was a deep foreshadowing of the kinds of tactics at hand. And one of the linchpin notions that we have to divorce ourselves from right now, all of us, whatever side of whatever aisle you're on, is that it is all tied. This is just Trump. No. This is the culmination of decades, generations, centuries worth of endless rinse and repeat experimentation. The agenda has always been what level of toxic, abhorrent, but somehow convenient and profitable enslavement will the masses tolerate. That has always been the agenda. We don't have to argue Republican versus Democrat. We don't have to argue this country versus that country. This is bigger than any scope anybody arguing is framing their arguments around. I dare say, my dear listeners, that what the world needs now is to smoke a J together and to sit down and really think by not thinking. And just let the imagery of our own past, things that are fact, endless wars. We've had war for so long, we've already had a war somewhere that was called the 100 Years' War. Why? Because it literally lasted 100 years. And we wrote operas about it, or something. Something like that. We've had the 50 Years' War. We've had wars. War is the agenda. The indoctrination is, how much war do you tolerate? How much war do you write off as a patriotic duty, as a necessary evil, as long as you aren't the ones under fire As long as it's not your neighborhood getting the bombs dropped on it, as long as it's not your kid whose brains are now splattered in some foreign place. That's the agenda. That is the brainwashing. That is what drives everyone who rises to power ultimately. And it reads like a funny script. For crying out loud, this buffoon of a snakes oil salesman, this cartoon character of greedy real estate tycoon baron gone crazy, gone political, is playing out the cards like it's a scene in a sitcom or a scene in a, made for TV movie about how America gets turned into the short-lived dictatorship known as Trumptopia. I some days feel like Will Ferrell in that Will Ferrell movie about the guy who doesn't realize he's the main character in a book until he starts hearing the narrator talk. My whole life I've been shaking my head, not in a judgy way, sooner or later you guys have to come around to this, right? Like you're gonna all sensible minded people, even if you strip away all my crazy spiritual stuff, do it. But my theory makes the most sense with it all there. But go ahead. You cannot deny that bottom line, everybody who walks into that office somehow or another becomes an instrument of engaging in the circus we call politics that winds up leading us into tolerating, a couple of more years of war here or there somehow or another. This threat, that threat, this country, that country, our freedoms, our freedoms, our freedoms, patriotism, go. Now, it was easy when I first tried to read the book 1984. In 1984, at the way too not quite ready for it yet age of like 8 or 9 or something, 7 maybe, I don't know. I was an ambitious reader as a child, but I often went, don't understand, gonna have to come back to this later. And I loved spending hours and hours and hours in bookstores sampling books. It was an evil, luxurious sin because I'd only buy one book a year or something, 2 or 3 books a year. For being such a book nerd, my ultimate favorite place is a library, but I can't afford to go to libraries, not money wise. Just I would do nothing else if I got a library card at a library near me. I would become addicted to being in there all the time, and I would lose sight of everything else. It would be dangerous. I'm addicted to the magic that can be contained inside, especially an old book that hasn't been fucked with. An old book published in ye olde ancient times that's like, boom, no one's messed with it. It was published in English. I can read it in English, and no one's got their claws in it. Not that there's a lot of those, but I digress. Put a pin in that theme for future reference in another episode. Speaking of which, one of my to-do list items for the end of the summer, one of my urgent to-do list items for this back half of summer is to catch up on all the pins I've pinned and see whether or not I ever came back to them in a future episode or not. Especially ones where I said I could do a whole episode about that. Make a list, check it twice, do some special episodes. Can't make any promises about when. But coming back to it, if we look at where we're at, Friday, July 27th, we've gone from no collusion, no collusion, no collusion, to seriously, you don't call that collusion? You just said stuff to each other on TV. I would count all of those instances of saying things that hurt the investigation as meddling or what's the word? What's the formal word when you make it a crime? Obstruction of justice, right? Tampering with potential witnesses. He's threatened people. He's threatened to fire people on Twitter. I know everyone's talking about this already, like, duh. And I kind of, maybe not, I'm not as foresighted as I think I am. But I know I've had the thought while not recording anything that he's so overt with his language in his declarations on both on Twitter and in the random things that he pulls out of his ass when he goes off script while on live TV, that either we will get a, and I'm positing it now because we've hit a certain juncture. I think we have to start watching for this. We've seen the first tangible evidence of this becoming a thing. I think I was thinking before, and I can't remember if I actually said this out loud in an episode or not, but his common use of flat out mixing really huge lies with tiny bits of truth, and really medium sized bits of truth with two, like a collection of lies, like a coronation of lies. He's not an idiot. Anybody who thinks he's an idiot, he's not. He's really, 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 really intelligently trolling everybody uh, by playing a buffoon. And the evidence of that, I posit to you, is how overtly he plays with the evidence, how overtly he plays with the truth, and almost acknowledging that he lies on many occasions. But in one in particular, he's said things like the following, and you guys will remember this specific quote. And I think it was about North Korea, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But he posited something before the meeting, before the summit, and then he threw out this gem of a line, which somebody's already memeified, which I should have pulled up in order to quote correctly. But as always, I'm ill prepared in the moment of inspiration. But he said something to the effect of, "Well, we'll see what happens. We'll try to make it happen. If he doesn't, I'll probably tell you. But maybe I'll just come up with something else to, some excuse. I'll come up with an excuse and I'll distract you with it." Paraphrasing completely, but we'll dig up the actual thing in editing in post. Hey, post, are you listening? Dig up the meme, read the quote. The fact checkers are working overtime, and in the flat out lie category, 6 a day since entering office. We're at day like 515 or 542 or something like that. Should have opened this up too. So that's 5, 6 lies a day, and I think they must fluctuate based on what's being asked and what's being walked back. I'm astounded at those in his base that do not see the obviousness of his walkback. He is quite literally, and not I'm not just being figurative. He's quite literally playing both sides of every argument. There's no collusion. There's no attacks. There's attacks. Russia probably didn't. Wouldn't have done it. Would have done it. Wouldn't it? Wouldn't have. I'm gonna walk back my walk back on the walk back, and then it's like now it's all a witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt. I respect my security services, but it's a witch hunt. But I respect them. Michael Cohen, best buddy. Now he's an absolute liar. All that stuff. And to come to the point historically, we have to take a big breather. We've come full circle, folks. We've come from flat out denial of things that they openly said that are on film, and we just have just rolled past that multiple instances. For example, a gem that people have forgotten, which hopefully will be remembered now by not just the media, if they're really doing their job to some degree of looking like they're professional, pretending to be uh, on the side of truth and the facts, but the two Trump sons openly stated things about business with Russia. 5 banks, clear and obvious, open, already exposed, already they leaked out way before the Russiagate became Russiagate. Before fake news was a household term. Oh yeah, Deutsche Bank and Russa Bank and 6 or 7 banks that either are directly tied through ownership, mind you, not just like, oh, Putin has some accounts there, but he owns chunks of them, or entities that he obviously controls owns chunks of these banks. Massive ties, massive debt, massive projects. Don't know where the money went. Blah 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 blah. This all come out. This all will be coming out in interesting detail once we find out what they're going to do with the CFO of Trump organization, which astounds me. All of us who've been on the follow the money side have been wondering why that guy wasn't the first guy subpoenaed, hit with what's that called when you can't talk? Not a restraining order, but a gag order, and put in isolation and deep, non non abusive, non stressful interrogation, because that guy knows everything. Of course, we don't know if he has already been deposed and interviewed and taken in for questioning, and we've only just now getting to find out that there's interest. But he's being subpoenaed to some public thing, I think, right? To some grand jury discussion. But I digress, because this isn't meant to be Good Morning Trumptopia. This is meant to be uh, Cannabis Talk, right? It's that time of day. And while all this craziness is going on, do do we, as a group of people that are underrepresented, just let the madness continue and let the underrepresentation just wash over us, or do we build consensus around an approach? And that, my friends, hopefully some of you who've been listening for a while know that that's sort of my gentle push. You understand that that's the direction I'm indicating, and that these guys are out to do all this craziness. And we can yell and scream out in the streets, and we can try. Listen, these threats of guillotining people, it's not cute, it's not funny. It's never funny when you threaten someone's life, even if they're a horrible person. It's not funny. Why people think that's cute or funny or appropriate protest, there are lines, right? We're supposed to have civil discourse. You have a freedom, you have the right to protest, but not to be a jerk, not to shout hate speech. You don't want to become those that you're protesting, right? So I humbly propose to you, my friends, that especially those of us in sort of on background in the deep, if there's a deep state, then there's a deep we the people, right? There's all those of us who kind of hang out in the weeds and maybe don't speak up and maybe don't post mad political posts all the time on the social media. And that's fine. I'm not judging that. But what I am saying is, I think the circumstances are making it clear that the calling to get involved, to participate in a solution, a true solution, not in the crazy cacophony of echo chamber produced distractionary conflict and reactionary negative energy whipping supposed civil discourse, right? That cause takes you got to be a Zen master to wade into the shitstorm that it is. And I say that knowing that I fail and would fail if I try to get really serious. There's so much whipped up anger coming from all quarters. And that's as programmed, as expected by those pulling the strings. Those of us watching from the sidelines, those of us with deep thoughts and deep feelings, it's not about getting heard now on a media stage. It's about anchoring down and playing the spirit card, right? These guys are all playing the political game. It's time to lay down some spirit game. So when I speak this language, I speak to those who label themselves as spiritual gangsters. I speak to those who take their meditation practice seriously. I call out to those who take their yoga practice seriously. We all often, at least, and I say this not from a place of judgment, but from a place of, trying to give voice to the rally cry that I'm hearing in the ethos and in the gravitas of the moment. If we believe the spiritual new age hippie mumbo jumbo that we quote believe in, then it's time to amp our game. There's plenty of people out there speaking spiritual talk and laying down spiritual truths in that social media savvy way. And thumbs up and kudos. And I always try to lend my support to those who are already part of my circle, and always welcoming new members of that community. Follow me on the Instagram Let's Network. I think it's time to reorganize and create a new meta grassroots movement of spiritual folks willing to double down on our spiritual talk. I think I've advanced this notion before, but I feel it's appropriate to bring it up here in this context of uh, Cannabis Talk because we're a member of that whether we realize it or not, folks. If you smoke cannabis because you believe that it heals you, then you are engaging in a spiritual practice. If you smoke cannabis because you love to party with it better than you love to party with alcohol, then you are on the doorsteps, my brother or sister, of joining the spiritual practice. And you don't have to abandon the party practice. It just becomes a slightly different thing in your life, and you do it in a different rhythm, in a different way. Like I was saying in a previous episode recently of Almost Daily Zencast, conscious intent. Well, I want to wrap this up because I don't want to make this episode too crazy long. But as always, thanks for listening. I know that it's stressful times out there, and it's tempting, my cannabis brothers and sisters, to get away with crazy shit because times be crazy, right? And we like to say, um, we like to make the excuse that dangerous times call for dangerous choices, or some rationalization along those lines. But I urge you to be savvy, respectful cannabis enthusiasts. It is time to look productive and helpful and strong and confident, not sloppy and out of control and causing accidents, et cetera, et cetera. And I say that, folks, because as a member of the tribe, I'm often accused of being an old fuddy duddy or a stick in the mud, but we put a lot of effort, we put a lot of political capital out, stoners out there, hopefully listening, into these new, more supportive, more open laws. And there is a trade-off always when you participate in civil society. Disagree with what you may disagree with, and protest whatever seems correct and just and humane to protest. But when you get cannabis approved recreationally, it often comes, and you argue for a model equivalent to alcohol. It's going to come with those restrictions, and they're going to come at you with those tools. We gave them tools, legal tools, to come after us. So be smart. Don't smoke in your car. I know the times are shitty, and the political scene is getting us down. Everyone's like, it's harshing my mellow, man. I just gotta like toke on the way to work. Don't do it. Don't toke 5 seconds before you get in the car. Be smart. Learn how your body type copes with the cannabis. And I know lots of people are like, I can smoke drive, it's safe. Yeah, but it's not allowed. And if you want to put on a responsible, civic, engaged, if you want to get out there and become part of the movement that helps change things, then you got to play by the rules we agree to play with, or else the game doesn't work. And I know politics is corrupt and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. We got to heal it from within, folks. As if you haven't heard that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many of you listen to all the segments, or how many of you listen only to the segments of a particular theme because you're like enthusiasts and that's what you're after. I always cross pollinate, anyways. That's a real question. I want to hear from you. If you're new and you've just joined, welcome to the Crazy Podcast Project. Please, 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 I'm starving for feedback. I want feedback. Give it to me on Facebook. Give it to me even more clearly under each individual episode on Sprecher.com. Help me build an audience. I want to get on iHeartRadio, and I have to have X many followers, unless they've changed the rules on me. Last time I checked, I had to have minimum followers and X many episodes. I qualify the episode numbers, but I don't have the followers yet. So, shameless plug for my own product. Help support, click, like, share, talk about it. use the hashtags that I'm sharing and tell your friends. If you appreciate what I ramble about, and if in any way, shape, or form has helped you decide that I'm crazy and you don't want to listen to this anymore, well, you're probably not listening. If it's helped you decide that, whoa, it, it's bizarre, but maybe, yes, we all should be meditating together to heal the planet, heal the species, heal all the bad guys, instead of letting war define who the bad guys are going to be next generation, because we'll all just come right back around, right? Then share the love, tell your friends, etc., etc. And as always, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. And then one for the open. Oh, yeah, I forgot to fix in post. It's that time. Cozy up, settle down, pack a bowl, fire it up. Let's talk about some crazy stuff. Welcome to the most recent episode of Cannabis Talk. So, if you're new to the show, thanks for tuning in. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. If you've been wondering, yes, my religion is a cannabis spirituality. For those who don't know, cannabis and religion not only have connections in current pop culture, in that certain people around the country are trying to or are successfully starting cannabis themed churches, but also cannabis and religion have some deep, funky, old school roots. It takes but a quick couple of key taps to find old art and mosaics and historical relics from all over the world that indicate quite clearly that ancient peoples of every kind of religion you can imagine were familiar with this delightful plant. So, what does it mean? Some people swear that it talks to you, and I have to say that in a way, not in an auditory, hallucinatory way. I didn't hear a strange voice emanating. I didn't see a plant with a mouth talking. But when I've asked the plant questions, knowledge has eventually come to me. Now, arguably, that happens in your mind, period. That's why we journal. That's why we do yoga. That's why we meditate, right? But it felt very distinctly like if if you can excuse me, it felt very distinctly like it had its own voice. If you can distinguish between the voice of someone from England, right, and someone from Louisiana, both of them have interesting, weird dialects or accents, whatever you want to call it. There's technical argument for how they're both or either, but they each speak English in a unique way, and it sounds different. Your ear can tell that, right? And you just automatically know. Odds are that person's from an interesting town in England, and this person's here from the United States, but it's got a little bit of that Louisiana French thing going on with it in their voice. Well, one can argue, I am suggesting to you, my friends, philosophically, not just out of my ass, but out of reading, the culmination of reading into it, reading historical and philosophical literature on the subject as much as I can, in that it relates to entheogenics, the use of plants, and the traditional approach to vision questing, as it were, seeking wisdom from the divine vis-a-vis engaging with natural allies is one way that some people talk about it. Ingredients of nature that facilitate our connectivity. Then I, I posit to you to contemplate that there are, in the same way you can tell those different speaking voices apart, um, you can sort of hear different, and I'm going to use quote unquote bunny ears, air quotes here, different sources in the same way, even if they're non verbal, right? And I'll give you mundane, everyday, ordinary, you don't have to believe in mystical things examples to comprehend it. When your body has a strange, mysterious pain, you almost know, oh, this is hurting. You almost know before you really feel it, don't you? You kind of, and you understand that your body is indicating that something's wrong there, wherever that pain is originating. And maybe that's a weak example. A more specific or accurate example is hunger. We dismiss hunger, but there's an intuitive communication going on there. And we dismiss it, and we use language that minimizes it. We sometimes say we have urges or cravings, but a different way of understanding that information or that sensation or that experience is our body telling us what it suggests. And everyone knows the sort of stereotype of pregnant women needing a strange combination of Rocky Road ice cream and fried pickles, right? For whatever reason, they just need it. And doctors will say that it's got something to do with overly specific nutrition needs, and some swear by that and say, oh, yeah, you really needed something that was in the ice cream and something that was in the pickles, and your body just went, screw it, it's gross, but I'm going to make you want that right now because I need those chemicals. I need that nutrition. And I think that that's valid. People dismiss it. Some people go, whatever. Some people talk about it the way they talk about placebo effect, like it's a marginal, negligible thing, which is ridiculous, right? Because the weird thing about placebo effect is that it does the job. It cures the thing, even though all you did was eat sugar. So we should, as I've said in other episodes, give it a little bit more credit and treat it as a scientific fact that you can cure the body or achieve certain things with the body without a physical tool that we normally would say is required. So what I'm getting at is, and of course, if you've been following along to all the episodes, you know already that the truth of what we are is much more complicated than what you're taught in school and what you generally get in the normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill outlets of information, whether it's media or otherwise, right? Information that somehow helps you model your idea of reality. That data set, by hook or by crook, by accident, coincidence, or manipulation, probably all of them, is sort of severely limited to a very shut down, tamped down, bleak, dare I say, perspective or a perspective on what we call reality, and it's much more complicated than that. Thankfully, though, and here's it astounds me, people still live under the effect of this lie, or the impact of the following lie. Luckily, the silver lining is we are not separate from any of it, right? But people do live under the influence of this lie that you're alone, you're separate, you're born alone, you'll die alone, and you're not connected to anything. It's just you and the emptiness inside your skull. Well, much has been said, much is yet to be discovered about the emptiness inside your skull. So don't minimize it as nothing, because nothing is not the nothing inside your skull is not the kind of nothing they've led you to believe. It's not nothing at all. There's a lot of sources, and I look at some in one of our segments, right? The segment I humbly invite you to check out, unauthorized and explicit readings, that contains so far a limited sampling of some of the books I'd like to pull very respectfully quotes and then ramble at nauseum about, because they represent places where others have identified and found ways to describe the same kinds of evidence from all over history, all around the world, that indicate that indeed organic to one's natural body self is this much more um, mysterious and hitherto poorly described, poorly illuminated, poorly defined, immaterial, energetic, and for lack of a better term, nonverbal set of tools and realities or perspectives on reality. They are totally accessible to us. They just take effort in clarifying the instrument being your entire self. So, my friends, I humbly posit to you, is it really that crazy to participate or approach your engagement with cannabis as something spiritual? You don't need to make it a religion, right? That's a big, cumbersome pain in the ass in real life, practical terms. I think that it's natural that religions will be created and will rise around it. And I hope to be part of that community that contributes to the intellectual, uh, what's the right word? The intellectual discourse that helps to explore those sets of narratives or define those cultures, because it can be a beautiful and healthy thing if approached correctly. Um, Obviously, there's plenty of examples of approaching it incorrectly, with an absent-minded, uh, conscious intent to the point of being negligent, or with a purposefully or manipulated, misguided, maladjusted, incorrect, negative intent, uh, conscious or unconscious, uh, because ego likes to hijack things. So not only can you experience negative experience with cannabis as you can with any other thing that does facilitate altered states of perception, but it can also be manipulated and corrupted, both externally by mundane sources and internally by your own ego system, your own ego demon. More on the word demon in other episodes. To put a pin on that and come back full circle. We're going to have a big episode on the demon deck in Tarot Journal, but that's a special tease. I may even just cut it out of the episode because I don't know when I'm going to relaunch that. But I digress. Thanks for joining me. Quick word about politics. Craziness, right? Now let's not get too lost in the weeds. But bum. That's a quadruple entendre, folks, and I'll leave it to you to figure out. But I do want to say the following about politics: we can't let them fuck up our environment. That's a fight we got to fight logistically with pressure tactics and open shaming tactics of those who are actually willing to do such terrible things to such beautiful, noble, majestic creatures, up to and including the bald eagle, for crying out loud. I guess Trumtopians will continue to masturbate to images of the bald eagle, but also not give two flying fucks if any bald eagles live in the world. Uh, and by masturbate, I mean emotionally. I don't think they actually do physically. That's gross. If they do, I may cut that out. It's really unwarranted imagery. I feel wrong for having made that joke. I might put it in the blooper reel. Um, But isn't that a valid question? The, the whole mindset that is at the center of Trumptopian thinking and was before it evolved into Trumptopian thinking, it was sort of like the right-wingian thinking. Right-wingian evolutionary thinking was that the image of a thing that is celebrated in patriotism, it's more important to love that image, even if that image is artificial, than the actual thing or event or person or living creature. That those are cool and awesome and great, but we're not going to see the real bald eagles at the baseball game, and it's more important that we love the bald eagle at the baseball game. So give us lots of recorded bald eagles and that awesome sound that's not actually even a fucking bald eagle most of the time because they mix in other birds that make it sound more cool and epic and echoey, like it's in the Grand Canyon. And, it's garbage, right? It's straight out of 1984. And in a way, we're really coming full circle in as much as that I recorded this episode out of order for some reason. The ideas for the end of the episode came first, and the ideas for the beginning episode came second. And we were talking about how spooky, close to Orwellian things were getting from the very, very beginnings of the campaign. And now he's literally telling his followers, in a very double speakish kind of way, to discredit what they see and hear and only believe what he tells them to believe. And I guess that includes to not believe what he has said, because he's on multiple occasions now directly refuted his own voice on tape. And as they what he wants is them to go, believe me, this is what happened. And in that moment, whatever moment that is, whatever moment, whatever version of the lie with a mix of the truth or none of the truth or all of the truth, as long as they rally to him in that saying of it, that is the truth. It is the most relativistic approach to truthiness, to truthism. Hey, kudos and hats off, by the way, to Stephen Colbert for calling it out way ahead of schedule. That's in his early days, he coined the term truthiness, and it is a critique of the excuse me, of the overt, sometimes obvious, but I guess sufficiently subtle enough programmatic approach of eroding the usefulness of facts versus that which is declared to be true. Facts have been, and we've been saying it, we've been jokingly saying it, and I think that by jokingly saying it as criticism, we've been participating in the indoctrination and the inoculation. We live in a post-factual society, increasingly. It's a slippery slope. To have said we live in a post-factual society was to have stepped onto the slippery slope of post-factualism, and like that is the agenda, and that has always been the agenda. That is the agenda, has always been the agenda, and ceases to be the agenda of all the bad guys, whichever arena or a field of play you might be pointing at them in, whether it's Russians or the alt right here, the NRA. The NRA has gone most delightfully silent, has been pointed out by a couple of different media outlets, not Fox News, but they've gone creepy quiet because they were already balls deep. Pardon the very graphic image there. They were already neck deep in their own machinations of propaganda and have been since they started spending whatever obscene amounts of money they spend on making guns sexy. And there's no arguing there. Anybody who is not caught up in the brainwashing can look really quickly at a cross section of movies, at a cross section of years, and go, oh yeah, it's been a relentless onslaught of making guns cool, making guns the answer to your problems. No matter what, ultimately, the bad guy's bad enough, you got to stop him with a bullet to the head, because he's that bad. And every bad guy gets that bad. To the point there that the social criticism is lost on people of the extreme gun Christian right when you mock Jesus as a gun owner, mockingly display Jesus as a gun owner. They love that. They don't see that as a criticism or a hypocrisy. There's plenty of shoot 'em all, let God decide at work in their thinking already, in that they believe that Jesus wants you armed and ready to fight a physical war, which you might get lucky if you're good enough with your divine tools of blowing brain caskets open. I don't know why I like to call them brain gaskets, but that's what skulls are. And that's what bullets are designed to do, is blow them right open. But there's this whole culture of being convinced that to be a good Christian is to be a well-armed soldier. And you can't there's no way you can argue with them. And they're wearing the cross, which proves otherwise. Jesus said, buy your swords, take your swords, arm yourself, defend yourself against any onslaught, and then, when the time is right, melt them down and turn them into plowshares, farm your land, feed your people. And, oh, by the way, when they come to get me, I will let them kill me. Because turn the other cheek, motherfucker. As soon as you lay down your weapons, you are right with the divine light. And as soon as you don't, you are begging to die by that weapon which you wield. And thus, by living by the weapon that you wield, you shall die by the weapon that you wield. And you will lower yourself to all others who have lived and died and killed by the weapons that they wield. Because thou shalt not kill, right? He was a fulfillment of the law. That doesn't mean suddenly those laws are not to be paid attention to. He's just living the example of what it looks like. I like to remind the Christian nation, the supposed Christian nation that we have here, and there's a lot of Christian nationalists that would love to kick everybody out or convert you all from whatever religion or non-religious status that you are currently enjoying as your right and freedom and liberty here in this great ye old United States that don't really exist anymore. But they would love to kick you out or convert you because they believe that this should be a nation of Christ and only for those who follow Christ. And the irony is, of course, that they do not do as Christ did. Christ lived among those who lived in filth. He lived among the poorest of the poor who had to beg. He lived among the homeless and the terminally ill. He lived among the thieves and the murderers and those who so desperate and so destitute that they are left with no other recourse but to prostitute their bodies to try to get by. He walked and lived among them and did not judge them, did not tell them to get a job. He healed them and loved them and lifted them up and reminded them of their humanity and reminded them that they can reawaken to their own divine magic. That part's been scrubbed out, along with there being talk of divine female and divine female Buddha-like status. Christ is the divine male spirit of the species. There is, of course, a divine female of the species because there are females in the species. But I digress. That's stuff I've already touched on in other recordings. So yeah, man, craziness, the politics, the crazy. I can't even begin but to say, wow, doesn't it feel like its own comic book already? Doesn't it feel like we're living in our own movie? Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. Until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. For coughing. As my old and very dear friend of mine used to say, I mean, I guess he still says it, I don't know. He would say, after a good, solid coughing fit, he would, kudos himself. He'd pat himself on the back and say something like, yeah, way to get it in there. And I would ask him I asked him once, after a while of watching him do that, what is that about, man? And he responded, when you're coughing, it's like the opposite of when you're coughing because of cigarettes. When you have a smoker's cough, you're hacking out your lung because it's all gross and nasty and dying from the tar. When you've got the cannabis cough, you're getting the healing nutrients, CBDs and THCs, from the cannabis smoke deeper in your lungs, which is helping to push out and clean all the gross, nasty shit. So that cough is healing. It's the healing cough. Of course, I am severely paraphrasing him, and he was, at the time of that conversation, we were both extremely high. But I digress. A little bonus material for the next Cannabis Talk episode. Okay. And now for the outro.